She flew alone into the storm's dark maw, where thunder roared and lightning clawed. 7 lives trapped in hell's fierce grip. A medic's courage, the only lifeline to grip. If you love true stories of bravery and courage, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an inspiring story like this one. Now, let's dive into the incredible journey of the female medic, who flew alone into the heart of a deadly storm to save 7 Marines and live to tell the tale. Rain hammered against the tin roof of the maintenance hangar, a steady drumbeat in the gray dawn. The base was quiet except for the occasional hum of a passing truck. On the far side of the runway, a lone figure walked through the puddles, her boots splashing water that seeped into the worn leather dot. Her name was Claire Donovan, 32 years old, U.S. Navy medic. A woman in a world still dominated by men who thought bravery came only with a deep voice and a square jaw. Claire had been stationed at Bishop Field, a mid-sized Marine Corps air station tucked on the edge of a small, windswept town in North Carolina. Locals drove old pickups, fishermen worked the docks, and the military base was the town's main heartbeat. She kept her eyes forward as she walked into the hangar. Inside, the air smelled of jet fuel and grease. A group of mechanics in green coveralls leaned against a tool chest, talking loud and laughing louder. One of them noticed her and smirked. "Careful, boys," he said. "Medic Barbie's on deck." The others chuckled. Claire felt the sting in her chest, but she didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that if you reacted, you gave them what they wanted. She set her pack down by the med cart, double-checking her supplies for the day's readiness drill. The voices behind her carried on. "She probably thinks she can fly a bird through a storm. Might as well send her to save the world while we're at it." Another voice cut in. "Nah, she'd cry before takeoff." She kept her hands busy, but inside her jaw tightened. These men didn't know her. They didn't know she'd grown up in a house where storms were normal, not just in the sky, but in the living room. Her father's anger had been just as violent as the hurricanes that swept their coastal town. They didn't know she'd batched from Marines twice her size who'd been blown apart in combat zones, or that she'd kept men alive with nothing but a needle, gauze, and sheer willpower. That morning, the base commander had called everyone to the operations room for the weather. Briefing. A tropical storm, moving faster than predicted, was churning toward the coast. Pilots were on standby, but flights were grounded until visibility improved. The plan was simple. Sit tight, ride it out. But plans had a way of changing. At 10:12 a.m., the emergency call came in. A Marine helicopter on a routine transport mission had gone down in the storm, somewhere between the mainland and an island training outpost. 7 Marines on board. Location uncertain. The storm's radar made pinpointing them nearly impossible. The operations room turned tense. The commander, Colonel Reeves, stood at the head of the table, tapping a pen against his palm. "Search and rescue's not possible until this front passes," he said firmly. "We don't risk more lives in this kind of weather." A young comes officer, pale-faced, spoke up. "Sir, one of the survivors just radioed in. They've got injuries. They won't last until the storm clears." The colonel's jaw tightened. "That's not my call. That's God's." The silence that followed was heavy. Claire's pulse quickened. She looked at the radar, at the storms, spinning mass, and then at the faces around the table. Most avoided her gaze. She stepped forward. "Send me." The colonel's head snapped toward her. "Donovan, this isn't a training exercise. That storm will eat you alive. I've flown medevac and worse," she said evenly. "You've got an injured crew out there with no time. I can get them." The room broke into murmurs. Someone muttered under their breath, "She's crazy." Reeves stared at her. "We've got 2 pilots grounded, because even they know this is suicide. What makes you think you'll make it back? Claire didn't blink, because I don't intend to come back without them. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Reeves shook his head, denied. The meeting broke. Claire walked out into the hangar, her mind already racing. She had seen that look in Reeves' eyes. It wasn't just concern. It was doubt. The same doubt she'd faced since she'd put on the uniform. But the clock was ticking. Somewhere out there, 7 Marines were bleeding in the rain. She moved with quiet speed, heading toward Blackbird 2, one of the base's older rescue choppers. The pilot roster was empty. Most of the qualified crew had been ordered to stand down. That's when she spotted Chief Warrant Officer Ray Hawk Hawkins, a wiry, sharp-eyed pilot with 20 years in the air and a habit of ignoring orders when they didn't make sense. He was leaning against a wing strut, sipping bad coffee from a paper cup. "You heard the call?" she asked. "Yeah," Hawk said, studying her. "I also heard the colonel shut you down." "I'm going anyway." He gave a short laugh. "You know the difference between bravery and stupidity?" "Yeah," she said. "Bravery is when you do it because it matters. Stupidity is when you don't." Hawk held her gaze, then tossed the coffee cup aside. "I'll fuel the bird." Minutes later, with wind ripping across the runway and rain pelting like nails against metal, Claire strapped into the co-pilot's seat. The chopper's blades roared to life, a deep, steady thump in her chest dot as they lifted into the storm. Lightning flashed across the sky, and the base shrank behind them. Down below, the mechanics stood at the hangar door, shaking their heads. "She's not coming back," one of them said. Claire gripped the edge of her seat and looked ahead into the dark wall of rain. She didn't answer, not them, not anyone. She would find those men, even if it meant flying straight into hell. The chopper rattled like an old truck over a gravel road, but Claire kept her focus ahead. Outside, the rain blurred everything into a moving gray sheet. Lightning flickered in the distance, sometimes close enough that the cockpit glowed for a heartbeat before fading back to shadow. Hawk's hands were steady on the controls, but his eyes darted between instruments and the storm ahead. "Visibility's at maybe 100 feet, he muttered. "You sure you still want to play hero?" "I'm not playing anything," Claire said. "We've got 7 men out there. That's all that matters." The headset crackled with static. Hawk fiddled with the COM dial until a faint voice broke through, cutting in and out like a ghost on the line. "2 down? Injuries bad. No shelter." Claire leaned forward. "This is Blackbird 2. Do you read?" Silence. Then more. "Static. They're fading," Hawk said grimly. She knew what that meant. "Bleeding out? Hypothermia. Shock." Every minute lost was another life slipping away. They pushed deeper into the storm. The chopper pitched and dipped under sudden wind gusts, the horizon tilting like the deck of a ship. Hawk kept it steady, muttering curses under his breath, his knuckles white. Claire scanned the GPS and the old paper map on her lap. If they went down near the training island, the wind could have pushed them east. Check the shoreline. A flash of lightning lit up the sea below, angry waves crashing against jagged rocks. Claire's stomach tightened. If the helicopter had gone down in that... She didn't finish the thought. After another 20 minutes of blind searching, Hawk spotted it. There, he shouted over the engine's roar. Through the sheets of rain, Claire saw a black shape half buried in a tangle of palm fronds and broken trees. The tail section was gone, rotor blades twisted like metal ribbons. Hawk brought the chopper low, fighting the wind. There was no clear landing zone, just mud and scattered debris. "You can't land here," she said. "Wasn't planning to," Hawk replied. He hovered as close as he dared, the skids barely 10 feet above the ground. Claire grabbed her med pack and clipped herself to the rescue cable. The wind tugged at her like invisible hands as she swung out into the storm. The moment her boots hit the ground, mud splashed up to her knees. The air smelled of salt, smoke, and fuel. "Hello, U.S. Navy medic," she shouted, her voice nearly swallowed by the wind. A figure emerged from behind a toppled Palm Sergeant Dale Morales, one arm hanging limp at his side, blood streaking down his temple. "Over here," he yelled hoarsely. "We got 2 unconscious. One with a busted leg, rest are banged up bad." Claire followed him through the wreckage. She counted quickly 7 men, just like the report. One lay motionless, pale as paper. Another clutched his abdomen, groaning in pain. The others shivered violently, soaked through. Her training took over. She knelt beside the motionless Marine, checked his airway, pulse weak but there. "I need a stretcher," she called into her headset. "On it," Hawk replied. She worked fast, checking each man, stabilizing where she could. Every injury told a story-impact trauma, shrapnel cuts, deep bruising from the crash harnesses. And all of them chilled to the bone dot as she wrapped a tourniquet around a corporal's leg. He looked at her through gritted teeth. Didn't think they'd send a girl? Claire didn't look up. Good thing they did. Minutes stretched. Like hours. The rain pounded harder. The wind howled like it wanted to rip the island apart. She got 2 Marines up on the cable first, sending them to Hawk Dot then. A sudden crack a tree split nearby and came crashing down, missing her by only a few feet. She didn't flinch. There was no time for fear. One by one, she loaded the injured into the rescue harness. By the time the 6th Marine was hoisted, her muscles burned, her soaked uniform clung to her skin, and her hands ached from gripping wet nylon straps. Finally, she clipped the last man, the one who'd been unconscious to the cable. As Hawk pulled him up, Claire glanced at the wreckage one last time. That's when she saw the blood. Not theirs, hers. Somewhere along the way, a shard of metal had cut deep into her side, but she'd been too focused to notice. She pressed a hand to it, felt the warm slickness under her palm. It didn't matter. Not until they were safe. Hawk's voice cut in. Over the headset. "Claire, you're last. Get on the cable." She looked up at the hovering chopper, rain lashing her face. Her legs felt heavy, but she clipped herself in and gave the signal. The ground fell away beneath her as the storm swallowed. The island behind them. Inside the cabin, the Marines huddled together, shivering but alive. One of them, a young private barely 20, met her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, ma'am." She just nodded. Words felt too small for the moment. Hawk turned the chopper toward the mainland, but the storm wasn't finished with them. Ahead, the clouds boiled black and angry, and the radio crackled with warnings. They were halfway home when the engine warning light flickered red. The red light blinked like a heartbeat in the cockpit, slow, steady, unrelenting. Hawk's jaw tightened as he adjusted the throttle, trying to coax more power from the struggling engine. Claire, strapped into the cabin seat beside the wounded Marines, felt the change instantly. The vibration was different, uneven, as though the chopper had developed a limp. She leaned forward toward the cockpit. "What's wrong?" "Fuel intake's choking," Hawk said without looking at her. "Could be water in the line." "Could be worse. Either way, we can't make the base like this." The Marines exchanged uneasy glances. They'd already survived a crash. The thought of going down again was almost too much to register. Claire gripped the seat's armrest. "Options? There's a strip on Hollow Point Island, old Coast Guard outpost, abandoned now," Hawk said. 2 miles ahead, if the wind doesn't shove us into the ocean first." The wind was doing its best to shove. Gusts slammed into the chopper's side, tilting it until the horizon skewed. Hawk fought it, muscles rigid, his eyes locked on the sliver of land that appeared in the distance between curtains of rain. Claire turned back to the men. She could read their faces: fatigue, fear, pain. "Hold on," she told them. "We're not done yet." The island came into view. A ragged strip of sand and scrub, an old dock half swallowed by the tide. Beyond it, a cracked landing pad sat like a forgotten relic from another war.Hawk brought them in low. The skids hit hard, bouncing once before settling. The engine coughed, sputtered, then died. For a moment, the only sound was the wind screaming through the palm fronds. "We're grounded," Hawk said flatly. The Marines needed shelter, and fast. Their soaked uniforms clung to them, and their skin had that pale, waxy look that told Claire hypothermia wasn't far off. "Inside," she said, pointing toward the low concrete building at the edge of the pad. The door resisted, swollen with years of damp, but Hawk put a shoulder to it and forced it open. The air inside was stale, tinged with mildew, but it was dry. They laid the wounded on the floor. Claire moved among them, checking pulses, redressing bandages, offering sips of water. Her own side still throbbed from the cut she'd taken earlier, but she ignored it. Sergeant Morales watched her work. "You're hurt," he said. "I've got 2 hands and breath in my lungs." "That's enough for now," she replied. Outside, the storm raged on. Every so often, the walls trembled under a particularly strong gust. Hawk was at the door, peering into the rain. "Radio's not getting through. We'll have to wait it out before anyone knows we're here." Waiting wasn't easy. The men were restless, the air heavy with unspoken fears. One Marine stared at the ceiling, mumbling under his breath about the crash, replaying it like a broken record. Another kept shifting his weight, wincing with each movement. Claire knelt beside the youngest Private Ryan, the one who'd thanked her earlier. His breathing was shallow, his lips tinged blue. She wrapped another thermal blanket around him. "You from around here?" he asked quietly. "North Carolina coast," she said. "Storms were my neighbors growing up." He gave a weak smile. "Guess that's why you're not scared." Claire didn't correct him. Truth was, she was scared, but fear was fuel if you knew how to burn it right. Hours passed. The rain didn't let up, and the light outside faded into early darkness. The storm's eye hadn't reached them yet, which meant the worst was still to come. When the wind shifted suddenly, Hawk's head snapped up. "Hear that?" It was faint, but growing a low thump, thump, thump that didn't belong to the storm. "Helicopter blades." Claire moved to the doorway, squinting into the wet gloom. A dark shape approached from the east, flying low. But something about it didn't look right. No Coast Guard markings. No base call signs coming over the radio.Hawk stepped up beside her. "That's not one of ours." The chopper circled once, then set down on the far side of the pad. 3 figures in dark rain gear jumped out, moving with the kind of precision that told her they weren't lost fishermen. "Who the hell are they?" Morales asked from inside. Claire's instincts prickled. Whoever they were, they didn't come. Here by accident. The lead figure raised a hand in greeting, but didn't smile. That's when she noticed the rifles slung over their shoulders. Rain ran down Claire's face as she stepped out onto the cracked landing pad. The 3 figures moved toward her, water dripping from their black hoods, boots crunching on the gravel. She held up a hand. "We've got injured men here. Identify yourselves." The leader pushed his hood back just far enough to show a sharp jaw and cold eyes. "We're looking for survivors from the crash," he said. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "You found them," Claire said. "We've stabilized them. We're waiting for extraction from Bishop Field." The man's gaze swept over her shoulder toward the building. "We'll take them from here." Something about the way he said it made her skin tighten. He didn't ask. He told. Hawk had come up behind her, muttering low so only she could hear. I don't like this. They're not Coast Guard, not Marines. No patches, no tags. Claire didn't like it either. Military protocol demanded identification in a rescue zone, names, ranks, units. These men had given none. One of the riflemen shifted his grip. Not a threatening move exactly, but close enough. Claire kept her tone even. We'll wait for official recovery. You're welcome to stand by until leader cut her off. No, you'll hand them over now. Inside the building, Sergeant Morales had risen to his feet, despite his injured arm. He'd heard every word. Who the hell are you? He demanded. The leader ignored him and stepped closer to Claire. His eyes were hard, unblinking. Some of the men on that chopper saw something they weren't supposed to. My orders are to take them off your hands. The words landed heavy. Claire felt her heart kick once hard. She didn't know what he meant, but she didn't need the full picture to understand one thing. If these men took her Marines, they wouldn't be seen again. She straightened her shoulders. They're not going anywhere with you. The man smiled slightly, as if he'd expected her to say that. Ma'am, you've had a long day. Don't make me turn it ugly. The wind howled through the palm trees, rain slanting sideways. Claire's mind moved past 3 of them, armed but slowed by the weather. She and Hawk had no rifles, just sidearms. The wounded Marines inside were in no shape to fight. She shifted just enough to block the doorway with her body. If you want them, you'll have to go through me. The leader's smile faded. So be it. The first shot came fast, a crack that echoed off the concrete walls. Hawk yanked her back inside as the bullet sparked against the doorway. Marines scrambled to cover behind the overturned tables, the sudden violence shocking them out of their exhaustion. Claire crouched low, drawing her sidearm. Hawk, they're trying to force us out. Yeah, Hawk said grimly, loading a fresh mag. They picked the wrong people to push. Outside, boots splashed in the mud as the riflemen fanned out. Another shot punched a hole through the wall just above Morales's head. Claire's pulse thudded in her ears, but she forced her breathing steady. Panic wasted oxygen. Calm kept you alive. She moved to the far window, peering through the cracked glass. One of the men was circling wide, probably trying to get to the back door. 2 front, 1 flanking, she whispered. Hawk nodded. I'll take the side. You hold the front. The storm masked their movements, rain drumming so loud it swallowed small sounds. Claire stayed low, sighting on the shadow moving between palm trunks. She waited until he was close enough to see the pale strip of skin under his chin, then squeezed the trigger. The man went down with a grunt, rifle clattering in the mud dot from the front. The leader's voice barked something she couldn't make out over the wind. The remaining 2 returned fire, bullets punching into the concrete like angry fists. Hawk fired from the side, forcing them back toward the chopper. The standoff stretched for long. Tense minutes, thunder rolling overhead, lightning flashing. Silhouettes against the storm. Finally, the leader seemed to decide it wasn't worth the cost. He called to his man, and they retreated to their bird, engines screaming to life. Claire stayed at the window, watching until they lifted into the rain and vanished toward the east. Inside, the air was thick with adrenaline and disbelief. Morales was the first to speak. What the hell was that about? I don't know, Claire said truthfully. But I know we just made someone angry. She checked each Marine again, making sure no one had taken a round. Hawk dragged the unconscious rifleman. They dropped to the far wall and secured him with a length of rope from the supply closet. When the man came to, shivering and coughing, Claire knelt beside him. You're going to tell me who sent you, she said quietly. He glared at her but said nothing. Lightning lit up the room, and in that flash she saw a tattoo ink just visible under his sleeve. Not military, not Coast Guard, private security. The kind that got paid to make problems disappear. And that meant the crash wasn't just bad luck. Somebody had wanted those Marines gone. Night came early, carried in by the storm like an unwelcome guest. The power had long since died in the old Coast Guard station, leaving the place lit only by the occasional flash of lightning through the cracked windows. Claire moved quietly through the room, checking each Marine. Her hands were steady, but her mind was running. That tattoo on the captured gunman's arm. She'd seen something like it once before, on a contractor in Afghanistan. The kind of man who worked for money, not a flag. Hawk had the prisoner in the far corner, wrists bound with rope, ankles tied to an old metal pipe. The man had stopped shivering, which wasn't a good sign. It meant his body was adjusting to the cold, and sometimes that came right before it shut down. But Hawk didn't seem inclined to offer him a blanket. "You think they'll be back?" Hawk asked, keeping his voice low. Claire didn't hesitate. "Yes, and next time they won't just send 3. Outside, the wind had shifted again. A low, constant roar, as if the ocean itself was pressing closer. The rain pounded the roof so hard that flakes of paint drifted down into the room. She laid a hand on Morales's forehead wound. Fever was creeping in. His arm wound was starting to swell, infection setting in fast. "Got antibiotics in my pack," she said, mostly to herself. She reached for it, rummaging past gauze rolls, saline, syringes. Morales tried to grin through the pain. "Not exactly. The rescue mission you signed up for, huh?" "I signed up to keep Marines alive," Claire said. "And you're still breathing, so I'd say we're right on target." He chuckled weakly and leaned back against the wall. By midnight, the storms. Worst had passed, but the wind still cut cold through the broken windows. Hawk had found a rusted padlock on an old storage locker and used it to secure the front door from the inside. Claire took first watch. She sat near the window, sidearm resting in her lap, eyes scanning the black night. Every shadow seemed to move. The prisoner occasionally shifted, the rope creaking, but said nothing. Around 2 a.m., she heard the distant chop of rotor blades. Not loud, not close, but enough to set her pulse hammering. She shook Hawk awake. "We've got company." He was on his feet instantly, checking his weapon. Direction? West, still a ways out, but they're coming. Hawk swore under his breath. "We can't move the wounded fast enough to run." Claire's mind was already turning. Then, "We make this place hard to take." In the dim light, they worked quickly. Hawk overturned the heavy storage locker to block the back door. Claire scavenged anything she could hold: flare guns, signal flares, a dented fire extinguisher. She posted the less injured Marines at defensible positions, teaching them how to aim low and keep their heads down. She knelt beside Private Ryan, who was still too weak to stand. "You focus on staying alive. We'll do the rest." His eyes were wide. "You really think they'll try again?" "I know they will," she said simply. By 3:15 a.m., the sound of the chopper was closer. This one was bigger, heavy lift. By the sound of it, then came the faint thump of a boat engine from the shore. 2 approaches at once. Whoever was running this wanted them gone tonight. The prisoner suddenly laughed, a low, ugly sound. "You're not making it off this island." Claire walked over and crouched in front of him. "Maybe, but if I go, you're going with me." For the first time, his smirk faded. A beam of light swept past the window flashlights, cutting through the rain. Hawk caught her eye. "We've got movement." The first figure appeared at the edge of the pad, rifle raised. Hawk fired a warning shot, sending him diving for cover. From the opposite side, 2 more men came running low, firing into the walls. Marines returned fire from inside, bullets chipping at the doorway. Claire kept low, moving between positions, checking on each man, reloading where needed. Her side ached fiercely now, warm blood seeping through her shirt, but she pushed it aside. The attackers were disciplined, moving in coordinated bursts. This wasn't some half-baked assault, this was trained. And they weren't afraid of the storm anymore. Over the radio, a voice barked orders. Claire couldn't make out the words, but she recognized the tone methodical, cold, certain of victory. Then the prisoner shouted toward the voice outside. "She's in here. The medic's alive." Claire didn't hesitate. She crossed the room in 2 strides and gagged him with a strip of cloth. "You just lost talking privileges." The next flash of lightning illuminated something that made her stomach drop. On the ridge above the pad, a man was setting up a long, thin tube shoulder fired. "Hawk," she said, pointing. His eyes widened. RPG. They had seconds before the first rocket hit. The man on the ridge steadied the launcher on his shoulder, his silhouette stark against the lightning-lit sky. Claire's instincts screamed, "Down! Everybody down!" She shouted. The RPG fired with a muffled thump, the rocket streaking toward them, trailing fire. Hawk tackled Morales flat as the round slammed into the outer wall. The explosion rattled the building, throwing dust and chunks of plaster into the air. One of the windows blew inward, spraying glass across the floor. The Marines coughed and blinked through the haze. Claire's ears rang, her side screaming in pain, but she forced herself up. "Status." "All here," Hawk called back. "Walls cracked, but we're still standing." Not for long, she thought. Another hit in the same spot, and the wall would give. She scanned the room, her mind racing. The old Coast Guard station had 2 things working for them: thick concrete, and a supply closet full of outdated, but still functional gear. She yanked the door open and spotted it an old signal flare launcher, the big kind meant for long-distance distress calls. She grabbed it, shoved a cartridge in, and knelt by the window. Through the storm, she spotted the RPG man reloading. She waited until lightning lit the ridge again and fired. The flare screamed through the rain, hitting just below his feet. It burst into a blinding red ball, throwing him backward off the ridge. The weapon clattered down the slope. The men below shouted and surged forward. Gunfire rattled against the doorway and windows. Hawk and the able Marines returned fire, keeping them pinned, but Claire could see it. They were closing in. "They'll breach soon," Hawk said grimly. Claire scanned the floor, then her eyes landed on the old fuel drums in the corner. Most were empty, but one still sloshed when she nudged it with her boot. She looked at Hawk. "Help me." Together they rolled it toward the back entrance. The smell of diesel filled the air. She ripped a strip from an old towel, soaked it, and tied it around the drum spigot like a wick. "You're making a bomb," Hawk said flatly. "I'm making a problem they don't want to walk through." She corrected. The sound of boots splashing outside was closer now, too close. Claire struck a match, the flame wavering in the wind from the broken windows. She touched it to the soaked cloth, then shoved the drum into the doorway and kicked it forward. It rolled a few feet before igniting in a sudden whoosh. The men outside cursed and scattered as the fire flared high, black smoke curling upward despite the rain. The heat was fierce, but it bought them space. Hawk used the moment to drag one of the wounded to a safer position deeper inside. Through the smoke and rain, Claire caught movement of figure, breaking from cover, running toward the pad. Not one of the attackers. This one carried a bright orange satchel and waved frantically. Hawk saw him too. "That's one of ours." The man dove through the doorway, coughing. His soaked uniform bore the Bishop field patch. "Chopper inbound." He shouted over the roar of the fire. Command finally broke radio silence. "You've got 1 shot 5 minutes before they're on station." 5 minutes? Hawk echoed. "We can't hold that long." Claire looked at the Marines. then at the newcomer. Then we don't hold. We move. She barked orders. Morales and the others who could walk took point to help carry the wounded. Hawk grabbed the prisoner by the rope and dragged him along. The pad was slick with rain, the air thick with smoke and the smell of burning diesel. Gunfire still cracked from the tree line, but sporadic now. They were trying to keep the group pinned, not destroy them before pickup dot. As they reached the center of the pad, the distant thump of rotor blades grew louder. A Navy Seahawk broke. Through the storm, searchlight cutting across the island. It banked sharply and hovered, the side door sliding open. Go! Hawk yelled. Claire helped lift Ryan into the hoist harness. The winch carried him up, spinning slightly in the wind. Another Marine went next, then another. The attackers were regrouping at the edge of the pad now, shouting over the storm. Bullets pinged off the Seahawk's fuselage. Hawk fired back, forcing them into cover. Claire was about to clip herself into the harness when she saw the prisoner still on the ground, glaring at her. You think this ends when you get back to base? He sneered. She stared at him for a beat, rain streaking down her face. No, she said quietly. That's when it starts. She clipped him into the harness instead and sent him up first. The look on his face as he rose into the chopper told her he understood exactly what she meant. When her turn came, Hawk was already in the air, one hand extended down to her. She gripped it and was pulled inside as the Seahawk banked away from the island, the attacker's figures shrinking below. The prisoner was shoved to the far side, a crewman watching him with one hand on his rifle. The Marines huddled together, pale but alive. Hawk leaned back, letting out a long breath. Claire's gaze stayed on the island, disappearing into the storm. Something about that crash and the men who'd tried to finish the job was bigger than any rescue, and she intended to find out who had ordered it. The Seahawk touched down at Bishop Field in the pale gray light of dawn. The rain had softened to a mist, and the runway glistened like wet steel. Medical teams swarmed the chopper as soon as the skids hit the tarmac. Claire helped the crew offload the injured Marines, guiding them toward stretchers, calling out injuries to the medics on standby. Private Ryan was taken last. He gave her a weak thumbs up as they wheeled him away. The prisoner was escorted off separately by two base MPs, his wrists cuffed, his soaked black jacket hanging heavy around him. He didn't look back at Claire, but the faint smirk on his face was enough to make her jaw tighten. Colonel Reeves was waiting at the edge of the pad, arms crossed. His face was unreadable as Hawk and Claire walked toward him. Report, he said flatly. Claire gave it to him straight how they'd found the crash site, the injuries, the extraction, and the armed men who tried to take the Marines. She mentioned the tattoo, the lack of identification, the RPG. She didn't embellish, didn't leave anything out. Reeves listened without interruption, but when she finished, he shook his head slightly. There's no record of any hostile presence on that island. The only storm out there was weather. Her brow furrowed. Sir, we engaged them directly. Hawk saw them too. The MPs have one in custody. Reeves glanced toward the MPs walking the prisoner away. That man will be processed by base security. As for the rest, he shrugged. Could have been scavengers. Criminals sometimes strip crash sites. That was not a bunch of looters, Hawk said sharply. They moved like a trained team. Reeves turned his gaze on him. Chief Warrant Officer, you were ordered to stand down yesterday. Instead, you flew into a storm, put yourself and a medic in danger, and risked government equipment. You're both lucky you're not in the brig right now. Claire stepped forward, heat rising in her chest. With respect, sir, if we had waited, all 7 of those Marines would be dead. Reeves didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked to the row of stretchers being wheeled toward the infirmary, then back to her. That will be all, Petty Officer Donovan. Dismissed. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't even an acknowledgement. It was a door slammed shut. Hawk muttered under his breath as they walked away. They don't want this getting out. By afternoon, word had spread around the base. Claire had defied orders, flown into the storm, and brought 7 men home. Some spoke her name with admiration, others with resentment. The official report that circulated later that day left out almost everything. There was no mention of the armed men, no mention of the firefight, no mention of the prisoner. According to the paper, it had been an isolated weather-related crash with no outside involvement. Claire stared at the report in disbelief. Hawk read over her shoulder. They've scrubbed it clean. That night, she went to the infirmary. Morales was propped up in bed, his arm in a sling. Ryan was asleep in the next cot. Morales gave her a nod as she approached. They're saying it was just bad luck, he said quietly. Claire pulled a chair beside him. You know that's a lie. Yeah, but they told us not to talk about it. Her jaw tightened. They can't bury this, not if we push back. Morales gave a weary smile. You're the only one stubborn enough to try. Over the next 2 days, she started quietly asking questions about the crash's original mission, the flight plan, this passenger manifest. Most people clammed up fast. A few warned her to drop it. One young intel officer she cornered in the mess hall whispered, "This goes higher than you think." Meanwhile, the prisoner vanished. The MPs claimed he'd been transferred to another facility, but no paperwork backed that up. Hawk tried to pull strings through old contacts, but even he came up empty. By the end of the week, Claire knew 2 things for sure. Someone had ordered that chopper down. That someone had enough power to erase the proof. She sat in her small on-base quarters that night, staring at the map of the coastline, the flight path drawn in red pencil. Her side still ached. Her uniform jacket still smelled faintly of smoke. Hawk knocked once, then let himself in. You're not letting this go, are you? No, she said. Not until I know why they wanted those men dead. He leaned against the doorframe. You're going to make enemies. She looked up at him, her eyes steady. Good. That means I'm getting close. The storm outside had passed, but inside the walls of Bishop Field, something darker was gathering quieter. Then thunder, but just as dangerous. And Claire was ready to meet it head on. Claire sat at the small desk in her quarters, the dim lamp casting shadows across stacks of papers, maps, and hastily scribbled notes. Every lead she'd chased had hit a wall. Every door slammed shut. But she refused to quit. Hawk had become her closest ally, quiet, steady, a man who knew when to push and when to hold back. Together, they pieced together fragments from the base logs, intercepted communications, and rumors whispered in dark corners. The truth was ugly. An unauthorized operation. A covert shipment of classified material. A botched deal gone deadly. The Marines on that chopper had stumbled into something bigger than a routine mission, something someone powerful wanted married. Claire's report had been rejected, dismissed as unsubstantiated. But she had one weapon left, the Marines she'd saved. Their stories matched hers, pain, fear, and courage woven into every word. She arranged a meeting with Colonel Reeves, requesting the presence of the surviving Marines and Hawk. The conference room was cold, sterile, but the tension inside was thick enough to choke on. Reeves sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 higher-ranking officers. Claire stood tall, every eye on her as she spoke. I am here to give voice to the men who fought and survived on Hollow Point Island. Their bravery saved lives that matter. She told the story, the crash, the storm, the armed attackers, the rescue. She named names when she could, described the prisoner, the tattoo, the RPG attack. The room fell silent, the weight of truth pressing down on them. Reeves's face was unreadable. Petty Officer Donovan, your insubordination endangered the mission and the personnel involved. Your actions could have sparked an international incident. Claire met his gaze. And burying the truth endangers everyone's trust in the mission. If we can't believe in each other, what are we fighting for? One by one, the Marines spoke, their voices steady but raw. Hawk described the firefight. Morales recounted the medical emergencies. Ryan talked about the fear that had threatened. To break them all, by the time they finished, Reeves was the only one left to speak. He sighed, the hard lines on his face softening. Perhaps it's time the higher-ups heard the full story. Weeks later, an official inquiry was launched. The covert operation was exposed, contractors implicated, and those responsible for the attack on the rescue team held accountable. The prisoner, once lost in the system, testified against his employers. Claire's name was cleared, her actions recognized as the difference between life and death for 7 Marines. She received a commendation for valor, a symbol not just of bravery, but of standing up for what was right. At the ceremony, she caught Hawk's eye. He nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement between warriors who had survived hell together. Walking out onto the base lawn, Claire looked up at the clear sky, no storm clouds, just sunlight warming her face. She had fought against doubt, danger, and betrayal. She had flown alone into hell and lived to tell the tale. And now the world finally believed her.